Namaste, Fist Pump, Angus here, and today we're going to cover glucose metabolism. So, when you eat carbs, they get broken down in your digestive system into a 6-carbon chain. I'm going to use these Lego bricks. There's 6 of them there. I just put the red ones there, no special reason, just to kind of see the distinction between the Lego bricks. So that is the actual carbon in a glucose, and glucose is super tiny. In fact, 1 gram contains this many glucose molecules. Mind blowing. It's a huge number. I'm not even going to attempt to say what that is. A gazillion trillion. So we'll stick to grams. So this is 1 glucose molecule, super tiny. And each one of these bricks is a carbon molecule, and where the calorie is this. Do you hear that noise? That is the calorie. That is the energy. So that requires energy for me to stick that together. And then when I do that, boom, that noise is the calorie. So what is the weight of that noise? There's 0 weight to that noise, right? It's a ridiculous question. So the calorie is just a measure of energy. And in your body, where these carbons are stuck together, it's where the calories contain. It's where the chemical energy is stuck together. And when your body breaks that down, that click noise is the energy. That's the explosion. And then once all this is broken down into its individual things and all that tiny amount of energy is released, this carbon is what we breathe out, and that is basically what a glucose is. So this carbon has weight. So if this carbon was stuck in an apple and I ate the apple and then I burned the energy within that apple, this is what would come out, would be the actual carbon, and the carbon has weight. So you can measure that exhaled carbon with something like a LUMEN device, and you can measure the intake of this carbon using a calorie tracker like MyFitnessPal, or on the LUMEN app, it has a calorie tracking app. And if you want to measure it in your bloodstream, you can do a blood prick, or you could use a continuous blood glucose monitor. The LUMEN, in my opinion, is slightly better because it's measuring what's coming out of your body. So you've tracked what's coming into your body, and then what it does in your body can be several things. So the glucose in your body, it can go down into your liver and be stored as liver glycogen. From there, it can be converted into fat if it needs to be converted into fat, depending on your stores. And it can also go into your muscles and become muscle glycogen to be used later on. And this all depends on whether your glycogen stores in your muscles are full or not, and whether you're insulin sensitive enough to actually store it. So you can have empty muscle glycogen, but your insulin sensitivity, that glucose just isn't getting in, and that's what insulin resistance is. That leads on to type 2 diabetes and other metabolic diseases. And if that is the case, so if you eat some glucose, say post-workout when you should be most insulin sensitive, that glucose should disappear. It shouldn't be coming out in your breath. It should be going into your muscles to go into the muscles. If you are getting kind of high measurements post-workout, you're probably a little bit insulin resistant. You might be very insulin resistant. You maybe know that, or maybe you don't know that. So one of the neat things about the body is you don't actually need insulin to store glucose. Movement itself, that muscle action will cause glucose to go what's in your bloodstream into the muscle to supply that muscle. So if you're doing, say, cardio or weightlifting, those actions without insulin should draw that glucose into the muscle to be used in the cell. So that's a useful thing to know. The scary things people say is that the glucose goes to your liver, and if the liver glycogen is full, it can then be converted into fat. This 6 Lego bricks cannot become more than 6 Lego bricks of fat. It's not like it goes into the liver and then just multiplies into giant belly fat or giant non-fatty liver disease. Basically, that can only become that, so it will either become that in the form of fat or in the form of glucose. So what will happen in the formation of fat is it just sticks more glucose together to make a lipid molecule. So as long as your intake or your outgoing is less than your intake, don't worry about that conversion to fat. It will just be burned off as fat during the day. It's not an issue unless you're overeating. So a lot of people are fearing glucose or carbohydrates in general. Carbohydrates are great for higher activity work. Your body kind of exclusively uses glucose when you get kind of heart rate or your physical exertion past a certain point. So don't be fearing glucose, especially if you're doing high intensity workouts. Like there was early days of CrossFit, everyone was on the paleo diet and doing CrossFit, and then people started doing like 3 WODs a day. Those people need carbohydrates. CrossFit athletes are generally consuming 400 to 500 grams of carbohydrates a day. If you're a recreational CrossFit athlete, yeah, you could get away with a lower-ish carb diet, but lower would still be somewhere between 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrates, and particularly stuffing those carbohydrates just before your workout, so you got some of this fuel ready to go to be burned off, whether you're insulin resistant or not. Having some glucose in your bloodstream around about your workout time works for everybody. In conclusion, track what's coming into the body. So the calorie itself is just the noise, it doesn't have weight, but the carbon molecules does have weight, and that will affect your weight scale. But don't worry too much about your weight scale, because fluid will have a bigger indicator of that. Track something like your average weight. So you track what's coming in, track what's going out, and adjust as necessary. Down this or try and increase your activity. But as my video on metabolic compensation explained, it's better to lower your calorie intake if you're having issues, and eat your carbohydrates around about your workout window, particularly if you're insulin resistant, and even if you're not, would be super helpful. For having a flexible metabolism will really help. The more flexible your metabolism is, the more you can get away with doing things wrong. But if you do things too wrong too often, you will lead into some trouble. So some of these things are, I'll be looking over here, got a wee list. So overeating, poor sleep, eating refined carbohydrates past your carb tolerance. So everyone has an amount of carbs. So like those CrossFit athletes that were saying could have 500 grams a day and be shredded. You may not be there. You may be at the lower end, say 100, 150 carbs per day. Don't forget your total intake still matters, and the amount of protein you're having, because protein can be converted down into carbohydrates as well. And again, carbohydrates not bad, total intake really matters. Doing things like full-time keto just makes you worse at burning carbohydrates generally. Being over restricted in general, exercising too much while in low calories, never really a good idea. You're just driving your metabolism into the ground. It's like driving an old car with next to no fuel and trying to drive it like a race car. Just not going to work. You kind of, like the CrossFit athletes, fuel for performance, or lower your performance and lower the fuel coming in to try and get a little bit better. Being in a low carbohydrate state while doing carbohydrate dominant work, like I said about like doing the high intensity with no carbs in the system, generally not a good idea. Sometimes you can have plenty of glycogen stores, so there's nothing wrong with doing a fasted workout. If you know you had carbohydrates the night before and you know your carb stores are nice and full, if your muscles feel nice and full, you can smash out a high intensity workout without eating. You should have plenty of glycogen. But if you're doing that day after day with a low carbohydrate diet, you're just stressing the system. And then being stressed in general can raise blood sugar without actually eating, and you can develop type 2 diabetes from stress alone, which is mind-blowing. That's my video. Hit like and subscribe. I've got links in the description. I'll try and put them in the first comment as well, and I'll check you in guys in the next one.